Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to talk about timing. And there was much rejoicing. Anyway, so what we're going to do here is we are going to be talking about the trusty, steadfast, no nonsense bouncing ball. And the reason why we use the bouncing ball so much in animation is really because it covers quite a few uh, principles in a pretty simple manner. So uh, I'm going to go ahead double check to make sure my settings are set to 30. Okay, we're going to save that. We're going to set this to be 1 because it tries to retime it. And we're just going to set the end frame to be 40 to give us a little playing room here. Let's go to frame 5. Let's give this baby a new color. And we'll make that red because it's purdy. All right. And we are going to be working in, let's say, the front view. Break out our work layout here. And I think we're going to just get rid of the perspective for now. And we're going to break this out. Okay, so here we have our red ball. Like there's a little. Okay, and oh, you want to set it so the bottom of it pretty much laying on the ground plane at frame 0. Okay, we're going to set a key there. Actually, what we're going to do is we are going to freeze the translations. Let me delete that key. So that will be anytime we go to 0, that's going to be the position right here on the ground plane. So if I go to move this up and I go to set it to 0, it's going to be right on that ground plane here. And what I think I'm going to do is create a cube just to make the ground plane a little bit more visible and easy to see. As we're working with this. Okay, that's a little bit better. There we go. So, here we have our ball. Let's go back to that mode. And we're going to set a key for it up here. Pressed S, keyed this. So I'm going to undo that. Since I'm not really going to be working with scale right now, I'm going to lock these channels, and then I'm also going to hide them. And then I'm going to set a keyframe on them. That way, it doesn't save any keyframes for those channels when we're in the editor, in the curve editor, and it just a few less curves to look at is always a good thing in my opinion. All right. So let's talk about some terminology. All right, this is going to be our first pose for our ball, and that's going to be at frame 1. And the next pose, I'm just going a random. I usually typically go 4 frames out, set my next pose. I have auto key on, so it automatically set that key for me. The reason why I do that is I keep my timing even, meaning I'll set keyframes at the exact same increments every 4 frames in the beginning to work out my poses. And once I'm happy with that, I go back and start shuffling keyframes around to get the timing that I want. So I'm basically just breaking it down, so I'm focusing on only one aspect at a time. It allows me to work a little smarter. I don't get lost or confused on what I'm working on at one time or try to focus on too many things at once because I'm a relative simpleton. So making it as easy for me to focus on just one thing at a time just helps in the long run. All right, so then I'm going to go another 4 frames out. I'm going to bring it up. Okay. So right now I'm not going to worry about anything other than just a vertical bounce. All right, I'm not going to worry about it translating or anything like that. So we're just going to do a bounce vertically here. So I've got the height at 12.5. So I think the second height is going to be at pretty much right there, like 6 3/4. Yeah, that's fine. All right. And then another 4 frames. We're going to set it back to 0. And then another 4 frames. We're just going to set it up to about 3. And we're going to another 4. Back to 0. Another 4. We're going to set it to 1.5. And then back to 0 here. All right. And then we'll 7.5. Oh, I think I jumped the ball there. There we go. And then 0. So now if we play this back, it doesn't look like much, right? So let's talk about a few things here. When I discussed timing initially, when we were going over the 12 principles, I said that the faster things move, the less frames it takes, the slower they move, the more frames it takes. So look at the distance covered between frames 1 and 5 here. It's quite a big difference. So it's only taking 3 frames, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4 frames to get to cover that distance. So as you play that, it's really fast. But now we're taking the same amount of frames, 4 frames, to cover half of that distance. So now it's going to be slower. And you see how we're cutting the distance, but we're keeping the frames the same, so it seems to go slower and slower. Right? So if this were the two extreme poses of a punch, like say this is the wind up, and that's after the hit, those two poses. If you had those poses only 4 frames apart, it's going to be super fast, and maybe that's what you want because it's a super fast punch. Or maybe it's supposedly, say this is the wind up of that punch, right? And you don't want that. You want the wind up to be really slow and drawn out. You wouldn't want it to happen, that big move between those 2 frames, to happen in such short. So you would have to take this and you would have to move it. So now when you played it, it would be much slower between these 2 frames. You guys follow me? All right, let's just undo those. So that's just something I wanted you to see. Again, I'm starting really simple here, and then we'll get to some more complex stuff on an actual rig. But I want you to understand the concepts at a basic level that we can then extrapolate out. Okay, so it doesn't look like much. Our timing's very even. Our curves are splined. So anytime, when there's a big delta between in the curve, so there's a really steep change in this curve here, that means the values are changing rapidly. As it starts to flatten out here, there's not a big difference. So there's not a lot of movement, right? So it's much smaller between these few frames. But then as the amplitude of the curve goes up, then the ball is moving higher. And again, up here in these few, there's not that much change in the curve, so the ball's not moving terribly much. And again, as you go down, it continues. So, so we have our even timed bounce here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to adjust these curves a little bit. We want the ball maybe not fall quite so fast. We want it to ease out of the pose up here. So as you can see the difference, the spacing here isn't as big as the spacing here, and then isn't as big as the spacing between these two frames. So it's gradually getting bigger and faster as it falls, and we'll cover that a little bit more in the next section on spacing. But as it goes to the ground, one thing you have to remember, maybe we'll just flatten it out entirely. When you're animating something, you know, whether it's a character jumping or falling, as an object falls to the earth, it's going to fall down faster than it is. It's going to take less frames for it to hit the ground than it does to hit to jump up. And the reason why is because you have gravity. The force of gravity pulling on an object, is going to, you know, cause it to move quicker, as opposed to an object leaving the ground by its own force, like a jump, is going to take more frames because you're fighting gravity. It's going to take more effort and energy, and we have to show that as animators. So let's take all these curves, all these keys on the bottom here, and we're going to turn them into linear, because we want the ball to fall quickly to the ground, and then that energy is going to quickly bounce off. We're also going to break these curves too, so we can modify them a little bit. And I'm just adjusting how quickly the ball is coming in and out of, coming into this keyframe and out of, or into this pose. Now, one thing we talked about earlier is the vocab, and you know, these are keyframes or key poses. So now it's starting to look a little bit more like a bouncing ball. What key poses are? Your storytelling poses. They're the poses that you absolutely have to have in order to show what it is the action you're trying to create. If I were to take one of these out, it's not really showing the action that I intended, because I wanted another bounce in there. So it really doesn't describe the idea that I'm trying to get across. So all those bounces need to be in there, right? So if I were to, you know, anything else that I added on here wouldn't necessarily be key poses, because they're not needed to really tell the story of the bouncing ball. They may help to embellish the story, tell you what kind of ball it is. You know, if it's a beach ball or a bowling ball, that can also be shown through timing. But really, your key poses are those poses used to tell your story. And if you take one out and your story's isn't coming across without it, then you know that's a key pose. Okay, so now we've got the ball bouncing. And again, it's all evenly timed. This is landing, you know, happening really fast. And then because all the timing, the distance is changing, but the timing is the same, you're getting this really fast drop here, right? And then as the ball continues to bounce, because it's moving less and less, it starts to slow down and come to a stop. So we don't really want that. All right, another quick vocab lesson. A breakdown. What a breakdown frame is. A breakdown frame basically is the pose that's in the middle right between two key poses. All right, and sometimes you can set that pose. Another vocab term is called a favor, where it can favor. So if I were to flip between these three poses, you can see the breakdown pose here is favoring the first key pose, as opposed to I could favor it towards the second key pose. So that would be a favor towards the second key pose. All right, so it's basically the drawing or the pose that you have set between two key poses. And we'll get into that a little bit more too, as we're working with the rig. But I just wanted to go over it because you're going to be hearing it. And I wanted you to make sure you knew what it was. All right, so again, we've got this happening really quickly. Is that first frame falling really fast from this pose to this pose, and then this pose to this pose. It's not, it's a little slower, and then it gets slower and slower until the end. So what we want to do is we want to take some of these poses. We want to make some room. We don't want it to fall quite so fast in the beginning. So we're gonna start playing with our timing a little bit here by moving these keyframes around. So what I'm doing is I'm selecting this last keyframe, and I am holding Shift and left mouse dragging over until I get to the last keyframe that I want to modify. Then I middle mouse click in here in the center, and I can shift these poses to the right to get more spacing or get more timing in here. So now when I play it, you can see the ball's not traveling quite as fast because I added some more in-betweens in there. And that's feeling a little bit better to me. Might even be able to use another frame. That's one way to do that. I just undid it. I have, when I think I discussed this on the setup, was his hotkeys adding in-betweens. So if I hit Alt-C, you can see it's adding in-betweens between this keyframe and this keyframe. Now we're at frame 40. And basically, it's the same way to do the same thing, but it's a lot quicker. Again, it's those little shortcuts and stuff that help speed you up. All right. So I'm thinking I feel like I'm going to add another in-between in here. And now I need to offset to get that last frame in. That's feeling a little bit better. It's not too heavy of a ball. Okay. So now that was our first adjustment to our timing, right? We started off everything very even. Now we added some space in here to slow that ball down. Now what I want to do is the ball comes up here, I want it to have a little bit more hang time as it hits the apex at this pose. So what we'll do is we'll jump over to here, right, this keyframe where it's in the air, and because I have weighted tangents set, I'm going to free the tangent weight so I can select this and pull it out a little bit. And then I'm going to modify these frames a little bit. So now what's going to happen is you're going to have the ball is going to be in the air at this area much longer than it was before. And now it's going to drop. So what that's going to do, let's do that really for all of them. Back that out a little bit. And then I want to just modify these guys a little. Okay. So now when we play it back, that has a much different effect. So what's happening is the ball's really quickly, here, let's do this, yeah. is really quickly going from the bottom key pose to the top, and then it kind of, the spacing is very small here, meaning it's not moving very much. The difference, it moves between one frame and the next, and then it'll quickly come back down. So it's having a little bit more air time on the bounces, which is giving it a little bit more character. And it's causing it to give it a more springier bounce because we're not spending a lot of time during the transition between the two extreme poses. We're seeing it in the air a lot. Okay, so now, one thing we had said before is that when the ball is fighting gravity, it should be a little slower, right? Than when it comes down. So let's go back here, and we're going to start adding some keyframes, or some, I'm sorry, some in-betweens. Let's give us some room here at the end. All right, so we want this, I'm using my shortcut, to take longer to get up than it does to fall. And the same thing here. And let's go down. We're going to add it in between here. And then we're going to add it in between here. So now, actually on those last two, I'm going to undo. But just on those second ones, because those last two actually need to be shorter. Because they're traveling such a short distance, the height is decreased so much, so we don't want it to take the same time as the other bounces. So we need to also bring those in to tighten that up. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add yet another frame. And then here, I think I might add one frame here. So I added 2 frames on this side. I'm going to add only one here. Right? Because it's still 1 frame longer to get to the top than it is to fall. We want the gravity's working with the ball, pulling it, pulling it towards the ground, so it's going to fall a little faster. And here we have same, so this is 4 frames, and this is 3. This we're going to actually make 2 frames, because right now I believe it's 4. We want to cut that down. So now I'm using Alt X, cut that down a frame. I want that, yeah, so that to be 3 because it was 4. Sorry, not 2. And then we want this to actually be 2 frames. And then this, we're going to have be 2 frames. And then this one, be 1. So now it kind of munged our curves a little bit. So we're going to need to come in here and kind of clean them up a little. We want to free the weight on these guys too. That's it. Just helps tremendously to give you more control over the curves, which I really like. And I'm going to free that up. Okay, there we go. So now, if we play this, it's starting to feel much more like a real bouncing ball. Now it kind of sticks here at the end, so we're going to add another bounce. Let's see here. 7, 5, 0, and then we're going to go up to 3, 5, and then we're going to advance a frame and back to 0. Let's just zoom in here real quick. See what we got. I'm going to modify this just a little bit. Okay. There we go. And there we have our bouncing ball.